Alright, so in the previous video we talked about the images saga and we were able to fetch all these images from the Unsplash API and render them on the screen. So in this video, in order to complicate this problem a little bit, we will fetch the download stats of these images from the Unsplash API and render them over the images. So to start with that, we will create some actions, set up the store, and then we'll go about setting up the Saga for handling the stats request. So we can start by creating these actions for the stats. So I'm just going to copy this and replace images with stats and then then export stats from my constants. And inside my actions, I will go ahead and create three actions for setting the loading and download stats and the error for my images. So this is going to work for us. So this basically means that I am now going to load the stats of a particular image ID, and once I have it, I will set those stats for that particular ID, and if I receive an error, I will set this boolean that will just report it to my image that the API was not able to give us any stats of this image and there was an error. So we're going to export these actions from this file. So it will be load image stats, set image stats, and set image stats error. Okay, so we have to import stats here. All right, so next step is to create the reducer for the stats, and it's going to be very much similar to what we did with our image reducer. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file here called statsreducer.js and paste in this code that I have already written here. So there is just going to be one layer of stats, which will just contain the image stats with the following format. So we are sorting. It's basically a dictionary of every image that we have, and the first key represents whether we are whether the loading is in progress. The second one is to store the download stats, and the third one will basically just set the flag for error if in case we run into any error. So yeah, that's pretty much it for our stats reducer, and we'll now connect it to our store by importing the stats reducer here. And we are going to call it image stats, and this will be called stats reducer. So I think we're pretty much set with our constant actions and reducer. The next step is to start writing the API plus the stat saga for all these images. So we can first start with the saga and then deal with the API. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file here called stats saga. So the strategy that we are going to follow for writing the stat saga is once we have these images loaded into our app, we will fire the request for every image for the statistics, for fetching the statistics. And we can do that by watching for the success action on the images, which will basically for us will be set images, and we know that set images is firing images load success action, and we'll basically just watch for this. Whenever this happens, we will dispatch more actions to get the download stats for all these images. So let's go to our stat saga, which we just created, and we will start by writing the handler for watching the stats request. So the generator function would look like this. So function star watch stats request, and this one will basically keep on watching for my images dot load underscore success action. So while true, basically infinite loop, I will watch for my action images dot load underscore success. Cool. And I will also need to import the take effect from Redux Saga effects. So take from Redux Saga effects. Now this action is going to provide us with the images, so I can basically just extract it from here, from the object that will return. And once I have those images, I can go over all these IDs of the images that I have fetched from Unsplash, and then make another request to the statistics endpoint and fetch all the download stats of these images. So we can write a loop here to go over all these images. Actually, we can just do a for each. Images dot for each image I need to fire. So we are going to introduce one new effect here called fork, which is very similar to call in terms that it will call our handler saga to basically our worker saga to handle the task that we are going to assign to that particular saga. But its main feature is to allow multiple of those handler sagas to work in parallel. So in comparison to call, this one is a non-blocking, and you can read more about it in the docs. But to give you an overview, we have already discussed what blocking and non-blocking calls are, and using a non-blocking call here will allow us to run to get the stats of all these images in parallel. So we're going to use fork and import fork from our effects, and we are going to call our, let's say, handle stats request saga, and it's going to take my particular image ID. And now we are going to create our handle stats request saga, the generator function. Handle stats request, which will take the ID of the image, and for now we'll just simply log this statement out, fetching stats for the ID. And I think yes, so we can actually try this first before we go ahead and do okay. In order to try this, we need to now run our saga in parallel to our images saga. So if I go into my index, you can see that we are only exporting the images saga from our root saga. So we have to now create a new saga called let's call it root saga, function root saga, and it will basically run both our images saga and our stat saga in parallel. So we need to import stat saga, and in order to run both of these things in parallel, we are going to import an effect from Redux Saga. It's called all. So it's very similar to promise.all, but it's allows them to be run on generators. So effects, and we're going to yield all we'll take an array. First one will be images saga, and the next one will be stats saga, and I think that's pretty much it. We now also need to export this by default, so export as default from here, and you're seeing an error here called import all from Redux Saga effects. Okay, I think I've got from here. Yeah. Yes, so I on purpose made this error of calling yield inside a for each in our stat saga here. I think, yeah. So we can't use a yield statement inside a for each. So that's why we need to use a for loop here, which will be very similar to what we are doing at the top. So I'll let I is 0, i's length will be images start length, and I plus plus. So we'll run this loop for all the images that we have and simply call this but on images of my current image dot id, and we can get rid of this and hope that things work from here. So we also need to export our watch stats request from here as the default stat saga. So export default function watch stats request. Okay, so let's see how the action got fired. So image load success got fired, but we should now see that inside our inspect element, fetching stats for this image, and this image. So all the three images that we have currently rendered in our gallery, we have basically forked them in parallel to make our handle stats request to simply handle the stats request for these three images. So we can now go ahead and create the API for making the statistics endpoints request for all these images, and that API is going to look very much similar to what we did with image stats, but this time we'll be dealing with the statistics endpoint. And I can just paste in this code here, which works very similar to what our fetch images does, but here it takes the ID of a particular image, hits the statistics endpoint, and give us the data or the error based on the status code. So I need to now export fetch images stats from here, and import the fetch image stats here because we're going to use it in our handle image stats request saga to dispatch the request for getting the download stats for every image. So we are going to import fetch image stats from the API, and now before we start writing this, I want to discuss this ideology that when you build apps for production, you don't generally build them for the golden path. You also need to cover all the edge cases. So in order to increase the complexity of the problem here, we are going to slide up a notch and increase the complexity a little bit by adding the retry logic in place. So let's suppose that our statistics endpoint throw us an error back and we want to retry it in case of failure. So we'll see how Redux Saga lets us cover all these use cases, cover all these recipes very easily when it comes to implementing them and declaratively writing them in a saga. So yeah, let's see if let's first dispatch the action to put the request. So yield put load image stats for my particular ID. Basically the ID that I received, I'll set the loading flag for that particular image, and then I'm going to call the fetch image stats for that particular image, and which should give me the stats. So I'll get some response from here, and then I'm going to go ahead and put that image download stats into our store. So set image stats, and we are going to add them. So this is how we are going to receive it inside downloads.total. This is going to contain the total number of downloads of that particular image, and this is what we need to put into our store. So yeah, I think so this covers the stats request, and we now need to handle the error. So in case of any error, we can just wrap this entire thing in a try block and move it up. Okay, my bad. So yeah, we can just move it inside the try block and create a catch block here to catch all the errors. So an interesting thing here would be to then retry in case of failure. So we need to basically call our handle stat saga again to again fire a dispatch an action for loading the image stats, and once we get them, put them into the image stats, and in case of failure again, do a retry again. But we want to put a limit on it, like we can't continuously keep on continuously hitting the server in case of failures. So let's assume that we're going to retry only 3 times. So I guess I can put the entire thing in a loop and put a cap of 3, and otherwise keep iterating, and move this entire logic into a loop. So now this ensures that my logic gets executed 3 times, but I don't really want to do that. So in case of success, I want to exit this particular saga. So I can just do return true, which will basically exit my saga. And in case of failure, it will keep on keep trying at most of 3 times. And if it fails, then we can then handle the error here. So yield put set image stats error of whatever ID we were trying for. So yeah, I mean that constitutes our entire logic for retrying. We are running a loop here, which basically is making the request for loading the image stats, fetching the image stats, and then putting them into our store. And if that's successful, we exit the saga. If not, we run the entire iteration again at most of 3 times. And in case of failure, after 3 trials, we set the error for a particular image. So I need to import all these actions from my effects. So put, and what else are we missing here? I think call. So yeah. Alright, so if I now look at my stats, I can see that first my images load got fired, and then images load success, which means that I have the images rendered on my gallery now. Now for every image we fired a stats load request. So you can see that since we forked it, all of these things ran in parallel. If we had done a call here, my saga would have suspended until this particular request, this particular saga gets resolved. So since we wanted to happen that in parallel, so we used fork, and we were able to do these things in parallel. And once I fired the stats load request for every image, I got the stats, and they were stored into my store here. So if I go ahead and check my state at the end of the entire thing, I should see that, oh, I have downloads 417 for a particular image, and the other one had 283 and the other one had 340. So now we can actually try for throwing an error from our image stats just to check if our retry logic is working properly. So if I go into my API and throw a dummy error from here, throw new error, sorry, and let's see. Okay, so a lot has happened here. When my image load success got fired, for every image on the screen, we fired three actions. Like one each, these three represent all the images that are present on the screen. This is image one, this is image two, and this is image three. And since all of them got the error, if I check the error, so it should state that the downloads were null. And if I check the state at this point, we can see that the loading was fired again because we have put this in a loop to retry. So the next iteration got fired, and again there are no differences. Then we fired the next iteration again for all these three images, and no difference because we are continuously throwing an error from our API. And then we eventually gave up by executing set image stats error, and you can see that error status was set to true after three retries. So yeah, that basically demonstrates how simple it is, how declarative it is to put together these recipes of logic when dealing with Redux Saga. You can actually go through the docs, and they have pretty much covered some very common recipes that you will encounter while building your apps, and you can actually take a look at them and learn a little bit from here. I highly recommend you to spend some time on the docs here and get familiarized with the recipes that they have in place. So coming back to our component now that we are basically handling all the loading, error, and download stats content, we need to now represent that on our screen. So first, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this fake sorry, and yep. I guess if I should check my state now, I should have the image stats in place. Yes, completely fine. And next part of this problem is to create a component to render all these stats onto my images. So we are going to go ahead into our components and close everything else. So I can go ahead and close everything else here and open my components and create this new file here called stats, which will have index.js, and another file here to contain this component stats.js. And from my index I already have this component in place, which basically renders the error. In case of error, this basically renders the string, and in case of loading, it renders this with this funny emoji, and another one in case of the downloads are not null. So I guess I need to now create a styles.css file which will contain the styles of this entire thing. And I also need to export the stats component from here. So yeah, I guess if I now go into my image grid component and import stats from double slash / stats, and we can render it inside our image component here. So stats will basically take, so if I go into my implementation here, I'll just show you that it takes a prop called stats, and we can just pass it as the stats we are going to receive from our store. And I can connect my store by image stats, and I will need to attach it here, image stats. So hopefully I should now have access to image stats in my component, and I can then access a particular image stats by just going over its ID. So image stats of image.id, which we are getting from here. And I think, yeah, this should work. Let's see. Image stats is not defined. Yeah, I forgot image stats here. Cool. So we now have the stats getting rendered properly here, and as I load more images, I should see that I was seeing a loading first, and then I was able to render the stats of these images. So this marks the implementation of our image gallery. We learned about a lot of effects and from the Redux Saga. We saw how we can set up Redux Saga with our Redux store properly, and we also learned a little bit about the blocking and non-blocking calls and some use cases when and how you should be using it. And I think at this point you should feel confident about using Redux Saga in any of the apps that you can build, because we cover a very generic plus a little complicated use case here. And in the next video we'll be covering the concepts of testing and testing Saga, and I think that should put more weight on you to start using Saga, because you will find out that Sagas are really incredibly easier to test when it comes to testing asynchronous code. So yeah, that's it for this video, and we'll see you in the next one.